Hello and welcome to an Inspector Calls Finish in 5. Essentially, by working through a series of about 5 or so extracts from the text, you'll be able to cover the whole text. Now, during each short video, we're going to cover what happens before the extract, why the extract itself matters, and what happens afterwards. Now, this is Extract 1 for an Inspector Calls. So let's start with what's happened so far. Now, the play opened in the dining room of the Birling's house. Mr. Birling is a wealthy factory owner, and the house very much shows this, with the Birlings having just finished an obviously luxurious meal celebrating the engagement of the Birling's daughter, Sheila, to Gerald Croft, who is the son of one of Mr. Birling's rivals. Now, the opening stage direction gives us a very clear impression of the Birlings. Mr. Birling is a big man in his 50s, with a trace of a regional accent. His wife, Mrs. Birling, is ever so slightly younger, and a rather cold woman who seems to have married beneath herself. The Birlings have 2 children, Sheila, a prettyish, rather shallow girl in her 20s, and Eric, a rather insecure and immature man, also in his 20s. There's some polite conversation. Gerald gives Sheila an engagement ring. There are a few hints that things may not be quite as rosy as they're being presented as being, and then Birling launches into the speech we're about to look at. Now, on the right-hand side in the yellow box, you'll see there's a few bullet points, just summarising a few key points from this slide, and you'll spot that as a pattern in the remaining slides as well. So what happens in this particular extract? Well, in the extract, Birling gives a big speech to everyone there about his views on society and on the future. Essentially, what Birling's doing here is sharing what he sees as his wisdom. Now, bear in mind, as we read this, that the original audience for the play was watching this unfold in 1945, but the play is set in 1912. I'm delighted about this engagement, and I hope it won't be too long before you're married. And I want to say this. There's a good deal of silly talk about these days, but I speak as a hard-headed practical businessman who has to take risks and know what he's about. I say you can ignore all this silly, pessimistic talk. When you marry, you'll be marrying at a very good time. Yes, a very good time, and soon it'll be an even better time. Well, last month, just because the miners came out on strike, there's a lot of wild talk about possible labour trouble in the near future. Now, don't worry. We're past the worst of it. We employers are at last coming together to see that our interests, the interests of capital, are properly protected. And we're in for a time of steadily increasing prosperity. I believe you're right, sir. What about war? Oh, I'm glad you mentioned it, Eric. I'm coming to that now. Just because the Kaiser makes a speech or two, or a few German officers have too much to drink and begin talking nonsense, you'll hear some people say that war's inevitable. And to that, I say, fiddlesticks. The Germans don't want war. Nobody wants war except some half-civilised folks in the Balkans. And why? There's too much at stake these days. Everything to lose and nothing to gain by war. Well, yeah, I know, but still. Just let me finish, Eric. You've a lot to learn, yes, and I'm talking as a hard-headed, practical man of business. Then I say there isn't a chance of war. The world's developing so fast it'll make war impossible. I mean, look at the progress we're making. In a year or two we'll have aeroplanes that'll be able to go anywhere. And look at the way the automobile's making headway, bigger and faster all the time, and then ships. Well, a friend of mine went over on this new liner last week, the Titanic. She sails next week. 46,800 tons. 46,800 tons. New York in 5 days, and every luxury, and unsinkable. Absolutely unsinkable. That's what you've got to keep your eye on. Facts like that, progress like that. Not a few German officers talking nonsense and a few scaremongers here making a fuss about nothing. Now, you 3 young people, just listen to this, right? And remember what I'm telling you now. In 20 or 30 years' time, or let's say in 1940, you may be given a little party like this. Your son or your daughter might be getting engaged. And I tell you, by that time, you'll be living in a world that'll have forgotten all these capital versus labour agitations and all these silly little war scares. There'll be peace and prosperity and rapid progress everywhere, except, of course, in Russia, which will always be behindhand naturally. Arthur. Oh, yes, Matilda, I know I'm talking too much, but you youngsters just remember what I said. We can't let these Bernard Shawses and H.G. Wellses do all the talking. We hard-headed practical businessmen must say something sometime, and we don't guess. We've had experience, and we know. Now, in terms of dissecting the extract, Birling frequently describes himself as a hard-headed businessman, seeming to make almost a virtue of his arrogance and his lack of sympathy. Now, Birling lists a lot of social problems, the minor strikes, the Kaiser making speeches, and he confidently predicts all of them being solved. He mentions technological progress and gives Titanic as an example of how much progress is being made, and he's wrong on every front. Now, an audience of the time would have known that the strikes would only get worse. Workers would get organised and fight for their rights. Just 2 years after the play is set, World War I would begin, caused in part, of course, by the Kaiser and exactly those German officers, with World War II beginning in 1939. The technology that Birling praises would be turned to mass-producing weapons of war, from planes to tanks to gas and to bombs, and Titanic would sink just a few weeks after Birling's speech is set as taking place. And that's quite an effective metaphor for Birling's arrogance and the wider problems in society. Now, Birling is wrong on every front, and the very fact that his speech is simply a lengthy monologue is clear evidence of his self-centeredness, his arrogance, and his inability to listen to anyone else's perspective. Notice that Birling talks over, or actually interrupts, the other characters around him. Now, what Priestley is showing us is that Birling is not simply oblivious to the realities of life and society, but as a symbol of the middle class, he's actually the root of the problems in society. Now, in terms of what happens after the speech, well, following Birling's speech, there's some more interaction between Birling, Gerald, and Eric, in which Birling continues to show his overconfidence and his complacency, with his focus very much on wanting a knighthood, which is the key for him to moving from middle class to upper class. And then the inspector arrives. Now, the inspector's arrival punctures Birling's pomposity, and Birling is the first character in the family to have to face up to the problems with their thoughts, with their words, and with their actions. Birling was the first to meet Eva Smith. He's then the first to be interviewed by the inspector, but he's not the last. Now, just quickly, on this screen, you can see a few other support mechanisms if you need them. There's, as ever, there's the recipe book with lots and lots and lots of useful stuff in there. There's the quotation cards you're given as well, and the CGP study guides, which were made available to everyone in Year 11 in NET in all our academies. There's the Net English YouTube channel, which is just youtube.com/netenglish1, which features hundreds of videos about lots of topics. There's a daily quotation on our Twitter account, which is just at @NET_English_, which is worth accessing. There's an NET text guide, which is available on the websites or just ask your teacher. And also through the Academy websites, there's a set of podcasts which go through every aspect of the play. So there's an absolute wealth of stuff out there to help you with revision, with plugging any gaps you have, and with that sort of thing. Right, hopefully that's been useful, and we will see you in Extract 2, which is the next video.